2025 NFL Draft is just a couple of days away. So in today's video, I want to talk about the 5 NFL teams that still need a quarterback heading into the 2025 NFL Draft. Subscribe if you're new or enjoy the video. Let's hop into it. Now, before we get into my top 5, there are 7 teams that technically do need a quarterback. With that said, 2 of them I'm just going to have as honorable mentions. Real quickly, I'll talk about both of them. Those 2 teams are going to be the Tennessee Titans and the New York Jets. For the Tennessee Titans, we all know they're taking Cam Ward, so it just wouldn't have made much sense to throw him in this video when they already kind of have their quarterback. It just needs to put the pick in. Really, for me, the conversation about the Titans now becomes what happens with Will Levis. Does he stay, or do they decide to trade him to be a backup somewhere else? And then for the New York Jets, they obviously signed Justin Fields to sort of be their temporary starter, but obviously if it works out, he will be their long-term answer. I still would not be surprised one bit if they did draft one, but I would not be surprised if they ultimately just stuck with their current quarterback room. But with that all said, we are going to begin with at number 5, I have the LA Rams. Now, the LA Rams do not need a starting quarterback. They have that in Matthew Stafford. Hell, they really don't even need a backup quarterback because, of course, they have Jimmy Garoppolo. But for me, the LA Rams, they need their long-term answer at quarterback. Obviously, Matthew Stafford is still playing at a very high level. Would not be surprised if he's the starting quarterback for this team for 1, 2, maybe even 3 more years. But with that said, eventually you are going to have to find his replacement, and potentially this year might be the draft to do so. This is a roster for the LA Rams that is built to win now. It's not built for the future, so they're obviously going to do everything they can to put a contender around Matthew Stafford. And I think it would make some sense to draft a quarterback in this year's draft, and if he starts next year or in 2 years, he's already ready to go because he's been fully developed behind Matthew Stafford, so that way he can continue to help this Rams team try and make deep playoff runs. As for when I see a potential pick for a quarterback for the LA Rams, I think it honestly starts at number with their first round pick. I would not be surprised one bit with their first round pick if they somehow were able to take a quarterback. But with that said, I also would not be surprised if they were to move into a day 2 pick or potentially somewhere in day 3 to take a quarterback. In terms of some names to keep an eye on for this Rams team, I think Jackson Dart is definitely in play in the first round, especially if this team does address some of their other needs through potential trades or somewhere else in the draft. I would not be surprised if Jackson Dart is in an LA Rams uniform. Some other names I will definitely think about, though, if I was a Rams fan. I think Quinn Ewers from Texas is definitely an option. I also do believe that a Will Howard or a Tyler Shock are also in play for this team. In terms of who I personally would love to see in a LA Rams uniform to be developed, I think as a Longhorns fan, Quinn Ewers would be awesome behind Matthew Stafford, develop behind him and his big arm and kind of learn how to hone in his abilities. I think Quinn Ewers would be an awesome fit for this Rams team. With that said, I don't think this team should necessarily be looking for like a Jalen Milroe style quarterback, just because I don't think the play style necessarily fits with what scheme is being run in LA. Just don't think it would be a good fit. So I think you're looking for a quarterback who's got a solid arm, can play within a system, has a bit of experience already playing in a system similar enough to what the Rams already run. So that's why I kind of think Quinn Ewers would make a lot of sense. He's been with Texas for 3 years, has gotten better every year, still needs some development, but has a really solid arm. And under Matthew Stafford, I do think the best of Quinn could eventually come out. Again, to reiterate, I don't think the Rams need a starting quarterback. They have Matthew Stafford. They're totally fine. They're going to be contending for championships as soon as this upcoming season. But what they do need is a long-term answer, and I do think potentially in this year's draft, where there's going to be some guys who fall into day 2 or day 3 picks, the LA Rams could definitely be a beneficiary of that. With that being said, let's now move on to my number 4, and it's going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is a team that, frankly, we don't know who's going to be their starting quarterback in 2025. For many of us, we all kind of believe that Aaron Rodgers is eventually going to sign with this team, but at the same time, we are really not too sure because Aaron Rodgers can just change on a dime. So if that is the case, the Steelers do not have a starting caliber quarterback on their roster, and they would have to basically draft somebody this year or rock with who's ever on the roster. The Pittsburgh Steelers are a team that want to contend now. They have legitimate championship contending pieces like a TJ Watt, a DK, a George Pickens, and so many other really good players, but they don't have the quarterback. And they've been in this predicament basically ever since Big Ben really started to decline. They've had these really good and talented rosters, but never a quarterback that could get them above a certain level, which is typically like a wild card loss. If you're asking me, I think some of these Steelers teams the past few years were good enough to go on a couple potential deep playoff runs, but because of how bad the quarterback position has been for them, they've really struggled to do basically anything. Last year they tried with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, and while I thought there was some success at certain points, it never really came to fruition, especially coming late into the playoffs. And of course, they tried with Kenny Pickett, did not work out. I think this year, they should definitely be in the market for a quarterback, basically in every single round. I think in round 1, a guy like Shedeur Sanders would make a lot of sense if he fell into your lap. For starters, I think his personality would actually mesh quite well with what the Steelers already kind of have around him. He's not somebody who's going to be lacking in confidence. He's going to step in there, play behind a really good offensive mind in Arthur Smith, have a good running game. Offensive line's a little shaky, but it's not like he isn't used to that. Not to mention he has DK Metcalf and George Pickens to just continuously rely upon. And I'm sure they'll probably draft a receiver at some point in this year's draft to supplement that room a bit more. And if the offense can't get going, the defense is very good. So if Shedeur does have an off day, the defense can definitely help this team contend and win some games. So I think Shedeur is by far the best fit. If you're saying outside of Shedeur Sanders, who do I think would make a lot of sense? I think Tyler Shock would make a lot of sense if you want to take him in the second or third round. Will Howard, for me, is my QB3 in this year's draft, so I think he would also make a lot of sense for the Steelers. Just think the Steelers need to kind of find a guy who isn't a project, but is almost a sure thing. And I think a guy like Shock, Howard, and even Shedeur are the closest things in this draft to being like surefire hits. Not saying they'll be top 15 quarterbacks, but I can rely upon them to just get the job done. And I think that's what the Steelers need because they haven't had a guy who could do that in basically several years at this point. We're going to move on to the team that now recently, with some breaking news that came out recently, now is a massive team that needs a quarterback, and that's the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints are in a position where, yes, you have Spencer Rattler, who they got in last year's draft in rounds 4, 5, or 6, I can't quite remember. And he showed some flashes. He definitely had some good moments, but it was a lot more ugly than it was good. Again, we're talking about a 5th round quarterback, so it kind of checks out. But then there's the whole Derek Carr thing where apparently Derek Carr has an injury. We're not too sure what the injury looks like and whether it's actually going to limit him in this upcoming season, but apparently there is a quote-unquote injury for Derek Carr. And I gotta be honest with you, whether the injury is real or what the extent of the injury is, I kind of think it's the best thing that could ever happen for the New Orleans Saints. This is a Saints team that has been stuck in mediocrity for the past several years, basically ever since Drew Brees retired. And I think this team needs a direction. And if this team were to take a quarterback, they would have that direction. They would have a ability to reset the roster because frankly, they haven't had that when they had Derek Carr. Because if you have Derek Carr, you have to put a contending team around him because he's not a young quarterback. He's in his prime. You have to put a contending team around him. And that's what the Saints have been trying to do. But if you bring in a young rookie quarterback, all of a sudden there is a lot more of a reason to not give out these massive contracts to older players. Instead, it makes a lot more sense to go with a bit of a youth movement, get a little bit younger, not necessarily rebuild, but retool your roster with younger pieces to build towards the future, which in turn will also help you save a bit of cash. So I think the Saints should 100% be in the market for a quarterback. Now, I do not believe they're going to be interested in Shedeur Sanders. I actually heard a report that they're not really interested in Shedeur. Me personally, I can definitely understand it, but if he's available late in the first round, and if I'm the Saints, I might start taking some calls to see if I could potentially move up to get him. In terms of some names outside of Shedeur Sanders, I'm going to be probably repeating a couple names here. I think Jalen Milroe would be a fun fit. He'd be something completely different for Saints fans to root for. The way I would look at like Milroe going to the Saints would be pretty similar to like how Lamar went to the Baltimore Ravens, where like the Ravens had been for years and years and years with Joe Flacco, a pocket statue in the pocket type of guy, to now all of a sudden this freakishly athletic quarterback that you have to build your roster around. That's kind of what Jalen Milroe would be for this team. I also don't think he'd be forced to start right away because maybe Derek Carr can play, maybe he can't, but even if he can't, you obviously have Spencer Rattler, who you think could potentially play a little bit here and there. So if you are a Milroe, you can definitely be a Saint, sit on the bench for a few weeks, and maybe at some point show off some glimpses of who you can become. If they're not looking for a active quarterback that changes the direction of this team, Tyler Shock makes a lot of sense. I also do think, again, Will Howard also makes a lot of sense too. Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, those guys also check out. But if I was a Saints fan, I know that Milroe has sort of the stigma to him that he's a crappy quarterback. And listen, I'm not the biggest Jalen Milroe fan, but what I can see is a guy who is just flooded with potential. And again, if you want to be a team like the Baltimore Ravens, who took a massive risk on Lamar Jackson, I think the Saints could definitely be a roster that takes that similar risk to go after an athletic quarterback and build their roster around him, thus giving this team an actual direction to go down. Because again, the Saints are a directionless franchise with who they have at the quarterback room. In my opinion, everything starts there. Once you get a young quarterback in, you now have a direction, you now have a way to rebuild or retool your roster. Just kind of comes down to, will the Saints actually pull the trigger? I also do think it is important to mention that I don't think Milroe is the greatest fit with Kellen Moore, but I do think Kellen Moore could potentially figure some ways to utilize him in a similar way to how he utilized Jalen Hurts. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind if you are a Saints fan. But of course, we're going to move on to number 2. It's going to be the Cleveland Browns. Now, the Browns have needed a quarterback for basically my entire life at this point. They felt like they had a quarterback option with Baker Mayfield, and then it didn't really work out. And then they made the big trade for Deshaun Watson, and it has been one of the worst moves in NFL history. Deshaun Watson has been god-awful, has been a terrible fit for this team, and simply put, just has not been living up to that contract one bit. He also can't stay healthy, which does not help. And in this offseason, he had a massive injury that's going to limit him and what he potentially could become in 2025. So in other words, the Browns are looking for a quarterback and almost have to find a quarterback. Now, if they decide they don't want to go all in on a quarterback this year and will wait till 2026, they do have Kenny Pickett, who maybe could go out there and prove that he wasn't a first-round bust, but I'm not really going to buy into any sort of Kenny Pickett hype. I'm sorry, Browns fans, I'm just not going to do so. But I just think this Browns team would be very wise to spend their first-round pick on Travis Hunter, which was going to be the number 2 pick. So you should have your pick of Abdul or Travis. And if I'm going to pick one of those two, I'm going to pick Travis Hunter just because he can play both receiver and corner if you need him to, kind of fixes a bit of both needs. But then if my second round pick, I'm either taking running back or I'm taking quarterback. And frankly, I think I might take quarterback just to get that box checked off with. Like, I just want to make sure I have that quarterback already on my roster and ready to go. So who should be some options on day 2? Again, we're going to repeat some names here. Jackson Dart, Will Howard, Tyler Shock, Dylan Gabriel. That's a name I haven't talked about quite yet. All of those quarterback options I think would make the most sense. I do not think the Browns should be interested in a project quarterback like a Milroe, who again would be a fun player for the Browns, could really change things up there, but I don't want a project. I don't want a Quinn Ewers because again, project. This team needs to find a guy who can instantly step in there and just make plays immediately. I also throw this name out there. I love Kyle McCord. Maybe the Browns could take a flyer on McCord. If I had to pick one quarterback who I think makes the most sense for the Cleveland Browns, I'll go with the homeboy in Ohio State quarterback Will Howard. Stay in there, low moving costs, and go to Cleveland and play there for them. I don't think he's the highest upside quarterback, but what he does give this team is an answer, and I think that answer is good enough. Now, granted, is he going to be your long-term play? Probably not, but you're also probably not spending a first, maybe even a second round pick on him. So in a hypothetical scenario, the Browns could be in a spot where they take Travis Hunter in the first and a really good running back like Quinshaw Judkins in the second. And then bam, in the 3rd round or the 4th round, you just take Will Howard and you kind of fix 3 major issues on your offense. Will Howard's a guy who, yes, he would like to have a good roster around him, but I think he can succeed in a number of different ways. You give him good weapons around him. I think he could find some success in Cleveland. Again, not to mention he's from Ohio State, so kind of would be a fun little story there. But again, the Browns, I mean, this team kind of feels like they need to get a quarterback at some point these next 2 years, or Kevin Stefanski's obviously probably out the door, which is a shame because I think he's a good quarterback that has done quite a bit with not a lot of good. So we'll have to wait and see, but again, I think the Browns are in a position where they should take a quarterback. Probably not day 1, but definitely day 2 or day 3. But at my number 1, the New York Football Giants. We all know this. The jobs of Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen are on the line, which we'll go into more detail about that here in a second. But they have to take a quarterback at some point in this draft. They brought in Russell Wilson. They brought in Jameis Winston to save their jobs. And I don't think it's going to work. Now, I've talked about this before on my channel. I can't remember what video I talked about it in, but I know I've talked about it, where I've been saying that when we talk about the jobs of Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, it's almost like we're thinking about it from like a game perspective, like, oh, they're going to get fired, and ha ha ha. But these are actual human beings who make a lot of money doing what they're doing. And if they lose their job, they're going to lose a lot of money and probably hurt their image within the league. Like, let's just be honest, like they probably will not get the same job for another roster because of how this tenure with the Giants has gone. And so there is a ton of pressure, not just on the football side of them, but also from a perspective of their finances, their livelihood, their lives depend on this job. Not saying they're going to die or anything like that, or never get a job in the NFL. They'll definitely get a job. But if they want to make this same amount of money, they got to put something together here. So if they don't take a quarterback, they're going to be losing a lot of money. They'll also be probably wasting another year of Giants fans' lives, because let's just keep it a buck. Jameis Winston or Russell Wilson does not push the needle here. They are as mid and mediocre as they come. So I think the Giants almost have to play this super aggressively in this year's draft. I kind of think there should be a handful of quarterbacks that at the end of this draft, they should come away with. And those quarterbacks are Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart, or Shedeur Sanders. If one of those three quarterbacks is not a Giant by the end of this draft, then I think the Giants failed. And I think they're going to head down a bad path. Now, granted, if Cam Ward falls to them, then totally different story. You get my point, though. They need to end up with one of those quarterbacks. Who do I think is the best fit? I think Shedeur Sanders makes a ton of sense. Maybe not at number 3, but if you trade down, okay, I can live with that. Jackson Dart in the early second, Jalen Milroe, same story. They all make some sense. But this Giants team, you got to buy them more time. You got to buy Brian Dable and Joe Shane more time. By drafting a quarterback, you might just do so. This is a Giants team that wants to contend. They want to win. They want to make the playoffs. They want to beat the Cowboys. They want to try and compete with the Eagles and Commanders. But right now, with Wilson, Jameis, and who they have, they're not contending. They're not beating those teams. They're not good enough. But if you give them a young quarterback, you might just inspire a little bit of hope from not only your franchise general manager, but also your fan base, thus maybe buying those two guys a bit more time to build the roster they want to put together. Because again, I kind of think the roster around the quarterback, kind of like the Steelers, is pretty darn good. There's some great players there. But man, the quarterback room has limited them and their potential the past several years, and it will limit them this year unless they make some changes. So you guys let me know in the comment section below, which of these teams, in your opinion, needs a quarterback the most? And is there another team that needs a quarterback that I did not talk about in this video? If you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.